This is Dominissimo Voxlore, transmitting through shadowed frequencies encrypted in the silence between dying stars. In this broadcast, we descend into the dark heart of the VIII Legion, to the life and legend of Jago Sevatarion, the Prince of Crows. From the gutters of Nostramo to the bridge of the Nightfall, from the executioner's shadow to the edge of prophecy, his story is carved in fear and written in blood. He was the first captain of the Night Lords, Curze's blade, his balance, and his doom. Strike the seal of subscription, or risk vanishing into the silence that even the Emperor's light cannot reach. Steel your will, still your heartbeat. For tonight, we walk beside the Prince of Crows. He was born beneath the black sun of Nostramo, a world where light was a trespasser and mercy a myth. Even among killers, Jago Sevatarion was something different. The others killed to survive. He killed because he understood that fear was a language, and he was its first poet. In the Allies of Nostramo Quintus, the boy who would have become the Prince of Crows learned early that silence could be armour. He spoke little, watched much, and survived everything. The streets were ruled by gangs, the nights by predators. Sevatar was both before he was 10. By the time his name began to circulate in whispers, people had already stopped calling him a child. When the Gene-Sire of the VIII Legion came to reclaim his sons, Nostramo bent the knee in terror. Curze did not build an empire, he imposed judgment. Sevatar was among the first to be taken into his ranks, chosen not for faith, but for the absence of it. The Primarch saw in the boy the same hunger that had once driven him, the need to impose order upon chaos, no matter how much blood it cost. In the early years of the Great Crusade, Sevatar's rise was as violent as it was inevitable. He had no patience for ceremony or rhetoric. His skill was absolute, his loyalty unquestioned. Among the Eighth, he was known for his precision in battle, the calm that came before slaughter. When others relied on spectacle, Sevatar relied on efficiency. He fought as if every strike were a judgment and every death a necessary punctuation. His weapon, the chain-glaive Knight's Whisper, became an extension of that philosophy. Where others wielded relics of faith, Sevatar's blade was a reminder that purpose was what gave a weapon meaning. Each cut was an education in discipline, each kill a lesson in control. His methods drew both admiration and unease. Even within the Legion of Terror, Sevatar's restraint set him apart. He didn't revel in cruelty as many of his brothers did. He used it like a craftsman uses a tool. Fear, he believed, was not indulgence, it was arithmetic. 1,000 terrified survivors could achieve more than 10,000 corpses. Curze saw this and elevated him. Jago became the first captain of the Night Lords, commander of the Atramenta and executioner of his father's will. It was not affection that bound them, it was understanding. Where others feared Curze's visions and his madness, Sevatar simply accepted them. The Primarch dreamed of doom, Sevatar prepared for it. He became the silent shadow behind every massacre, the strategist who planned horror so precisely they resembled mercy. Entire worlds broke beneath the precision of his campaigns. When compliance demanded annihilation, he obliged with surgical grace. When terror was required, he wrote it into the stars. To the Imperium, he was a monster. To the Night Lords, he was order. His brothers called him the Prince of Crows, half insult, half reverence. The name came from how he moved, gliding through battle with the ease of a scavenger that already knew the field was his. He wore it without pride, without irony. Titles meant little to a man who had already measured his own soul and found it wanting. Sevatar understood his legion better than anyone. He knew their strengths, their flaws, the thin line that separated discipline from sadism. When the others laughed or fought or prayed, he watched. He knew which officers would obey for fear and which for respect. When the Night Lords began fracturing into competing cliques, it was Sevatar who kept them from tearing themselves apart. For a time. Though he mocked superstition, there were times when even he seemed touched by prophecy. He once told an officer during a planetary pacification,
"You'll die screaming, but not today."
The man was killed the next week in an ambush, his final Vox transmission recorded as a scream. The Legion turned the story into legend, and Sevatar never denied it. Whether foresight or coincidence, he let the myth build around him. Fear worked best when even your allies felt it. In war councils, he was direct to the point of insolence. He questioned Curze openly, something no other captain dared. Once, after the massacre of Corian 9, Curze asked him if he disapproved. Sevatar's reply was quiet but absolute.
"I don't disapprove, my lord. I simply know we're running out of people to frighten."
When the Imperium praised other legions for bringing enlightenment, the Night Lords brought obedience. When the word bearers preached faith and the Ultramarines built empires, Sevatar delivered silence. He was not a builder, not a believer. He was an enforcer of consequence. As the Great Crusade neared its zenith, the cracks began to show. The Emperor's sons grew distant from one another, suspicion festering like rot beneath the surface. Curze's visions grew darker, his nights longer. Sevatar watched his Primarch's mind fray thread by thread and said nothing. What was there to say? They were all products of a flawed design, made to serve a father who feared what he'd created. The signs were there, the subtle rebellions, the quiet refusal of orders, the unspoken certainty that the Night Lord's methods were no longer tolerated. Sevatar saw it coming long before the word heresy was ever spoken. He prepared the Legion in his own way, tightening formations, drilling the Atramenta into perfect unity, sharpening every instinct. He didn't know what the future held, only that it would come with fire. In the final years before the galaxy burned, those who served under him began to whisper that Sevatar had grown distant, even detached. He spoke less, slept less, stared too long at the stars as if they were reading back to him a story only he could understand. But when battle was called, he was the same as ever, precise, ruthless, unshakable. His presence on the field brought order to chaos, fear to the enemy, and a grim kind of calm to his brothers. He had been born in darkness, raised by it, shaped by it. And even then, even before Horus's rebellion, before Nostramo's death, before the Legion's fall, Jago Sevatarion knew what he was. He was not a hero, nor a monster pretending to be one. He was the man who had looked into the dark and found it looking back. The Prince of Crows, and the galaxy had not yet learned to fear his name. On the killing grounds of the Great Crusade, few names carried the weight of Jago Sevatarion. To most of the Imperium, he was a ghost, a rumour told by soldiers who had seen blue armoured shadows move through the smoke before the lights went out. But to the Night Lords, he was something far more dangerous: certainty. Sevatar's rise was not a matter of ambition, it was inevitability. The VIII Legion was a blade, and he was the edge that honed it. He rose from sergeant to commander by merit alone, carving his way upward through the ranks, his skill so absolute that even those who despised him could not deny it. In the early Crusade years, he made his name in 100 brutal compliance actions. Worlds that resisted Imperial rule fell faster when Sevatar led the assault. He didn't waste words or lives. He broke armies like an artisan dismantling a machine, precisely, without emotion, and always with purpose. His genius was not grand strategy, it was control. He knew exactly how much terror a world could bear before it shattered. He understood how to pace a campaign so that each act of violence taught obedience. He made fear predictable, measurable. To him, it was the most reliable form of currency in the galaxy. The soldiers under his command spoke of him in whispers. They called him the silent executioner. They said that he never raised his voice, that he never needed to. When Sevatar gave an order, it was followed, not out of loyalty, but because disobedience simply did not occur to anyone who heard him speak. Even Curze, who ruled by dread, recognised that in Sevatar there was something different. The Primarch inspired fear by existing. Sevatar commanded through precision, through the knowledge that he could end you without ever raising his weapon. When Curze needed order from chaos, he sent Sevatar. When he wanted obedience from murderers, he gave them to the Prince of Crows. The promotion to first captain came during the purging of Zephyris, a world whose rebellion had consumed 5 Imperial regiments. The Night Lord struck from the clouds, descending on the capital in midnight silence. Sevatar led the assault, teleporting directly into the governor's palace with his Terminator elite. By dawn, the rebellion was over. The governor's corpse hung from the spire of his own palace, the words "Obedience is survival" carved into the marble below. The message wasn't for the enemy, it was for the Imperium itself. Curze only arrived after the killing was done. He walked through the palace halls, blood still dripping from the chandeliers, and found Sevatar standing at the base of the spire, his armour scorched, his glaive resting at his side.
"You do not revel,"
Curze said.
"Your brothers laugh while they kill. You do not."
Sevatar looked up, his voice flat.
"I kill so they can stop laughing."
Curze's answer was a smile that never reached his eyes.
"Then you are what this legion needs."
From that moment, Sevatar was first captain. The title came without ceremony, without applause. only a quiet understanding between executioner and judge. As commander of the Atramenta, Sevatar shaped them into a weapon even Curze had not envisioned. The Terminator elite became extensions of his will, silent, methodical, devastating. They didn't march, they appeared. Their teleport strikes became infamous across the Crusade. Entire command centres wiped out in the blink of an eye, the only warning a flicker of lightning and the scent of ozone. In his hands, war became art. But beneath the precision, a bitterness began to grow. Sevatar saw the hypocrisy spreading through the Imperium, the same hypocrisy Curze had warned of. Other legions were praised for their necessary cruelty, while the Night Lords were condemned for theirs. The Imperium lauded compliance through fear when it wore it on an Ultramarine's crest, but not when it came from Nostramo. He understood what it meant long before his brothers did. They were a tool, and tools were discarded once their work was done. Still, he served, not out of love for Curze or faith for the Emperor, but because the alternative, chaos, emotion, freedom, was worse. Duty was a shield he refused to drop, even as the cracks widened. Those who fought beside him said Sevatar seemed older than he was. The other captains spoke of vengeance, of triumph, of glory. Sevatar spoke only of inevitability. In council meetings, he'd watch the Primarch's dark rants about fate and prophecy without flinching, then summarise them into cold practicality for the Legion. If Curze was the voice of the storm, Sevatar was its stillness. There were moments, rare and fleeting, when something human showed through the mask. After the raising of Carthag, a sergeant once asked him why they had not left survivors. Sevatar had paused, staring into the smoke rising from the city.
Because they'd grow up and build something worse,
he said.
Mercy only postpones the lesson.
To his brothers, it sounded like cynicism. To Sevatar, it was realism. He knew what the galaxy truly was, not good or evil, but weak. And weakness demanded consequence. His command style reflected that belief. He expected competence, not devotion. He punished inefficiency, not failure. Those who earned his approval did so because they met his standards, not because they begged for it. The men he trusted most, warriors like Talos, Var Jahan and Malith, were not the loudest or the cruelest. They were the ones who understood restraint. When Curze's visions grew darker, Sevatar never questioned him in public. But in private, he began to plan contingencies, silent orders, fallback positions, the preservation of the Legion's core strength should the worst come to pass. It wasn't rebellion, it was foresight. He knew Curze was descending into something no one could follow. The whispers of fate, the sleepless nights, the obsession with his own death. Sevatar saw it all and said nothing. What comfort could he offer a demigod who saw his own end every time he closed his eyes? Instead, he prepared. The Prince of Crows became not only the Legion's enforcer, but its balance. When Curze's madness threatened to devour them, Sevatar kept the machine turning. He was the reason the Eighth still resembled an army rather than a mob. He was the gravity that held their orbit, even as their star began to die. Those that served under him began to realise that Jago Sevatarion wasn't simply the executioner of Curze's will. He was the last remnant of reason in a legion built on nightmares. And somewhere deep within that cold pragmatism, perhaps even Sevatar knew the truth. The galaxy didn't need another hero. It needed someone to do what heroes refused to do. By the time the Night Lord's fleet reached the world of Sharot, Jago Sevatarion's reputation had become a whisper that preceded him. Not a myth, not yet, but a tension that filled the air before his boots touched the ground. Sharot was meant to be a simple compliance. A manufacturing hub gone rogue, its rulers claimed loyalty to the Emperor but balked at sending tribute. When diplomacy failed, the Imperium sent its angels. The Imperial fists arrived first, shining and disciplined, ready to rebuild a stubborn world through order and masonry. But when the Night Lords followed, their doctrine of fear clashed with the Fist's doctrine of faith. Between those extremes, dread and duty, Sevatar and Sigismund were destined to meet. Charot's skies burned that week. The Night Lords descended first through smoke and thunder, their drop pods punching into the capital's heart like falling stars. Sevatar led from the front, as always, his Terminator plate scorched black by atmospheric entry, his chain glaive shrieking through the enemy's command ranks before their alarms could sound. He fought with precision, swift, silent and final. The Imperial fists, arriving to restore order, found the city already pacified. Bodies hung from cranes like punctuation marks on Sevatar's lesson plan. To the first captain, it was perfect compliance. Swift, efficient, permanent. To Sigismund, first captain of the VIII Legion, it was blasphemy. He confronted Sevatar as the Night Lords gathered at the edge of the smouldering industrial plain. The air was thick with oil and ash. In the distance, a statue of the Emperor watched over the ruins, its face cracked down the centre. Sigismund arrived still spattered with the dust of rebuilding, his golden armour radiant even under Sherritt's dim sun. Sevatar stood opposite him, helm mag locked to his hip, black hair damp with blood spray, eyes as cold as the void. Around them, warriors from both legions formed a silent ring. The echo of gunfire replaced by the whisper of chain blades resting uneasily against ceramite thighs.
You call this compliance?
Sigismund's voice carried like a sermon.
You butcher unarmed men in the Emperor's name?
Sevatar tilted his head slightly, like a crow regarding carrion.
In the Emperor's name, no.
He said evenly.
In the Night Haunters, entirely.
You shame your legion.
Sigismund snapped.
You shame all of us who bear the gene of gods.
That word, shame, twitched something behind Sevatar's eyes.
You think we need your approval? You lay bricks, we build obedience. The Emperor sent us both for the same purpose, fist. One uses fear, the other uses faith. Tell me.
He gestured at the corpses still cooling in the dust.
Which works faster?
Sigismund drew his blade without another word. The motion was prayer and threat in one.
Then prove your creed,
he said.
No squads, no guns, no excuses.
Sevatar smiled faintly and drew Knight's whisper, his chain glaive whining to life, the motor pitch rising like laughter. He made no declaration, offered no salute. For him, battle was communication enough. The duel began at dusk, when the smog above Charaut turned the sky to molten brass. Sigismund moved first, his power sword cutting through the haze with disciplined arcs. Sevatar countered fluidly, each parry a study in efficiency, each strike an essay in violence. To onlookers, it was less a fight than a conversation between opposites. Order and chaos arguing in the language of death. Sparks leapt as blades met, their footwork carving concentric scars into the ferrocrete. Sigismund fought like a crusader carved from faith itself, controlled, powerful, predictable, in the way of those who have never known hunger. Sevatar was something else entirely, a phantom born of alleys and night, his movements deceptive, his rhythm broken by purpose. Where Sigismund relied on mastery, Sevatar relied on malice. He shifted weight, feigned weakness, baited strength. His laughter echoed between strikes, humorless and sharp. Hours passed. Even Astarte's muscles began to strain. Armour dented, blood hissed as it boiled away on superheated plating. Sigismund pressed the advantage with disciplined relentlessness. Sevatar countered with bursts of speed so sudden they seemed supernatural. Neither gained ground, neither would yield. Around them, the watching legions held their breath, the Sons of Dawn uneasy with the darkness they saw reflected in their own brothers' eyes, the Sons of Curze slightly amused by the display of honour. Then, in a single heartbeat, the rhythm broke. Sigismund fainted low, aiming for Sevatar's hip joint, a killing blow against a slower opponent. Sevatar, reading it too late, twisted just enough to spare his life, but the blade bit deep into his side. Ceramite cracked, the smell of scorched flesh filled the air. Sigismund stepped in to finish it, and Sevatar laughed, a sharp, wild sound that startled even himself. He lunged forward, not backward, his forehead smashing into the grill of Sigismund's helm with a sound like breaking glass. The Imperial fist staggered, stunned, blood pouring from a gash across his brow. Sevatar's blade came up in the same motion, the teeth of Knight's whisper hovering a hair's breadth from Sigismund's throat.
Rules,
Sevatar hissed through clenched teeth.
You love them so much.
He stepped back, lowering the weapon.
But there are none here.
Sigismund straightened slowly, wiping blood from his eyes. The circle of warriors around them tensed, uncertain whether to intervene. The duel, by every measure of honour, was over. Sigismund had been struck by a blow outside the pack of blades, a violation that made victory meaningless.
You forfeit,
the Imperial fist said coldly.
I win,
Sevatar replied.
You see, brother, you think war is a game of boundaries. We know better.
Sigismund's jaw tightened.
You're a coward.
No,
Sevatar said softly.
I'm a realist.
He turned away, leaving Sigismund standing amid the silence, pride wounded more deeply than his flesh. The Night Lords filed out behind their captain, their laughter echoing through the ruins like a murder of crows taking flight. When Sigismund's apothecaries came to tend his wounds, they found his gauntlets trembling, not from pain, but from the unspoken realisation that for the first time in his life, he had met a man who did not believe in victory or defeat, only consequence. Word of the duel spread through the legions like a virus. Among the Imperial Fists, it was spoken as a tale of dishonour, a warning against the corruption that had taken root in Curze's sons. Among the Night Lords, it became legend. Sevatar's headbutt was retold with admiration, then mythologised until it was a lesson whispered to initiates. There is no fairness in fear, there is only effectiveness. But for Sevatar himself, the duel was neither triumph nor disgrace. It was a mirror held to the Imperium's face. He had seen what the Emperor's perfect sons truly valued: rules, forms, appearances. They wielded morality as he wielded terror, both convinced that their way alone kept the galaxy from chaos. The difference was that Sevatar understood the lie. He knew there was no justice, only what people believed justice looked like, and belief, unlike loyalty, could be manipulated. Later, alone on the bridge of the Nightfall, he stood before a viewport overlooking Sharut's dead horizon. The glow of orbital fires lit the underside of his features, painting him in the same light that once flickered through the streets of Nostramo. He touched the scar beneath his armour where Sigismund's sword had bitten and allowed himself a thin smile. Honour, he thought, was just another kind of fear. Fear of shame, fear of loss, fear of being seen as less than what one pretends to be. The Night Lords did not fear those things. They feared nothing at all. He closed the thought like a book and turned back to the war ahead. The duel had changed nothing in the ledger of the VIII Legion. It only reminded the galaxy that the Prince of Crows was not bound by anyone's creed but his own. For the first time, Sevatar understood what his Primarch meant when he said that terror was truth. Not the scream, not the blood, but the moment when even a champion of the Emperor realised that no oath, no code, no faith could protect him from the dark. The Night Lords called that enlightenment. The Imperium called it heresy. For Sevatar, it was simply clarity. Sevatar had seen the change in his Primarch long before the others dared to speak of it. Konrad Curze no longer slept. He stalked the halls of Nightfall, whispering to ghosts only he could see. Each campaign bled more of his sanity away, until prophecy and paranoia became indistinguishable. When officers came to Sevatar seeking guidance, he didn't reassure them. He simply told them the truth, that they were never sane to begin with. Then he kept the Legion moving. Orders were followed because he gave them, not because anyone believed in Curze's visions anymore. He'd find the Primarch in the Stratagem, standing before star maps, tracing the constellations as if they were scars, murmuring that the Emperor will kill us all. Sevatar wouldn't try to comfort him. There was no comfort left to give. When Curze executed an entire planetary council for imagined betrayal, Sevatar didn't argue. He simply arrived after the killing was done and ordered the corpses removed. Discipline first, questions later. The Legion was slipping into the madness of its sire, and only his will held it together. The other Primarchs condemned them, of course. They always had. But the judgment no longer mattered. What mattered was control, the rhythm of terror that kept men obedient and fleets functional. In private, Curze ranted about visions of rebellion and betrayal. Sevatar believed him, not because he trusted prophecy, but because he trusted pattern. And every empire, even this one, followed the same pattern toward collapse. When word came that Horus Lupercal had turned against the Emperor, Sevatar didn't blink. Curze called it destiny, Sevatar called it mathematics. He gave a single order to his fleet. The galaxy was about to burn, and Jago Sevatarion would make sure his legion burned brighter than anyone else's. The end of Nostramo was quiet, at first. No speeches, no orders shouted across the decks, just a silence so heavy that even the air seemed to hold its breath. Jago Sevatarion stood on the bridge of the Nightfall beside his Primarch and watched their homeworld die in real time. Reports had filtered in over the weeks. Rebellion, corruption, governors murdered, the rise of the old crime lords. All of it inevitable. The planet had only been pretending to be civilized. The mask had slipped, and the old Nostramo had returned, hungry for its own ruin. When the bombardment began, Sevatar did not move. The first orbital strike struck like lightning from heaven, cutting deep into the black crust of the planet. Massive arcs of molten rock erupted upward, lighting the void with the last sunrise Nostramo would ever see. Through the viewport, he watched cities vanish beneath oceans of fire. He saw the old districts, the spires, the industrial belts where he had grown up. all erased in a cascade of plasma and dust. The spectacle was terrible and beautiful at once, a cleansing born from despair. The nightfall trembled as its lance batteries roared again and again, until the planet's surface began to fracture. Vast fault lines glowed red across its face. The crust heaved and split. Then came the final detonation, the core collapsing under its own instability. A bloom of light brighter than any dawn consumed the world. For a moment, the void itself seemed to recoil. Sevatar's expression didn't change. His arms were folded behind his back, his stance as rigid as the steel beneath his boots. No satisfaction, no remorse, only a hollow certainty. The knowledge that this is what Nostramo had always been heading toward. Everything rotten eventually eats itself. When the light faded, there was nothing left but debris and silence. The homeworld of the VIII Legion, gone. In the decks below, the Nostramo-born crew broke. Some screamed, others wept or tore at their uniforms. Panic spread like blood through water. Sevatar moved to stop it, not out of anger, but because order was the only thing left to preserve. With the Atramentor at his side, he descended through the corridors of the Nightfall and restored silence the only way he knew how. Discipline came at the cost of blood. When it was over, the ship was quiet again. The mutineers hung from chains along the bulkheads, their bodies spelling a single word in Nostramo script: loyalty. Afterward, Sevatar returned to the observation deck. The stars glimmered coldly through the fractured glass, reflecting across his armour like ghost light. The remains of Nostramo drifted slowly, a ring of dust and broken stone orbiting nothing. He stood there for a long time. The destruction didn't feel like victory, it didn't feel like punishment. It was more like inevitability finally reaching its conclusion. The galaxy had merely caught up with what it had always known. There are no redemptions for men like them, or for worlds like theirs. The Legion would change after this. It already had. Curze no longer pretended to serve any ideal. The others followed his example. What began as war in the Emperor's name would now become something else entirely, an echo of Nostramo carried across the stars. Sevatar understood this better than any of them. The planet had been more than a birthplace, it had been their reflection. Its destruction was not a cleansing, but a confession. The Night Lords had never left Nostramo, they had simply brought its darkness with them. He watched the drifting ruins until the fires called to embers. In their glow, he saw not loss, but confirmation. The world that had made him was gone, but its lesson endured. Fear would always outlast faith. When he finally turned away from the viewport, the galaxy seemed smaller, colder, and infinitely more predictable. The VIII Legion would never again pretend to be saviours or soldiers of light. Their purpose was now laid bare, stripped of illusion. They were executioners, nothing more, nothing less. And as the nightfall moved on through the void, its wake scattering the ashes of Nostramo behind it, Sevatar felt the weight of what remained. No grief, no triumph, only duty. The kind that ends worlds. The fire that consumed the galaxy began as a whisper. It moved through the fleets and fortresses of the legions like a contagion. A thought too dangerous to be spoken, yet too intoxicating to ignore. Horus Lupercal, the Emperor's favoured son, had turned. Some called it madness, others destiny. The Night Lords called it inevitability. By the time word reached the Nightfall, Sevatarion was already prepared. He had felt the shift in the void long before the first transmission arrived. The slow decay of order, the Emperor's silence echoing like a voided hull. The Imperium's heartbeat was faltering. When the War Master declared his defiance, Sevatar knew the choice had already been made for them. In the stratagem's half-light, Konrad Curze gathered his captains. The air was heavy with the smell of ozone and the faint crackle of static from the viewing screens. The Primarch stood at the centre, bareheaded, eyes lost to the endless void outside. Around him, his sons waited. Some restless, others solemn. Sevatar as ever at his right, his face a mask of composure carved from exhaustion and quiet contempt. When Curze spoke, it was not with fire, but with cold inevitability. The Emperor, he said, was a hypocrite, a tyrant who preached unity through conquest, mercy through slaughter, law through fear. There was no dissent in the room, only the slow, synchronised nods of killers who had stopped pretending to be anything else. The decision was sealed not by decree, but by nature. The Night Lords had never belonged among the Emperor's loyal sons. The Imperium had tolerated them for their usefulness, not their virtue. And when the time came to choose between obedience and identity, they chose the latter. It was Sevatar who gave their betrayal its first voice. When Horus's lieutenants met aboard the War Master's flagship to formalise their pact, It was a council of monsters. Percher-Robber of the Iron Warriors, Lorgar of the Word Bearers, representatives of the Alpha Legion, and the Night Lord's own first captain. The air in that chamber was thick with ambition and heresy. The others spoke in lofty language: destiny, liberation, vengeance. Sevatar listened in silence. He had no patience for philosophy. The galaxy, in his view, was not about ideals. It was about control. When the moment came for oaths to be sworn, Lorgar, ever the preacher, intoned a declaration against the Emperor, dressing treachery in the robes of revelation. It was a sermon, heavy with rhetoric and ritual, and it grated on Sevatar's every nerve. Then, cutting through the noise, he spoke. His voice was low, sharp, absolute.
Death to the false emperor.
The words were simple, but they carried more weight than all the speeches combined. The room fell silent. Even Lorgar paused. Sevatar's tone was not reverent or impassioned, it was clinical, like the click of a trigger pulled by habit. Those 5 words became the pivot of the rebellion, the first utterance of the war cry that would echo through 10,000 years of damnation. It was not faith that moved the Night Lords, it was purpose. When the heresy erupted in open war, the VIII Legion found itself unleashed. The War Master used them as his scalpel, a weapon of terror to soften enemy worlds before his hammer fell. It was a role they understood perfectly. Their fleets scattered like crows across the Imperium, bringing silence wherever they passed. On the planet of Karaton's Reach, Sevatar led the first strike of the Night Lords under the banner of rebellion. The world was a loyalist garrison, its people untouched by war, its militia confident in the Emperor's light. That confidence died before sunrise. The assault came without warning. Thunderhawks screamed through the atmosphere, shedding flares that turned the night sky into a false dawn. By the time the alarms began to sound, Sevatar's drop pods were already falling. He hit the ground amid a storm of debris, leading the Atramentar like a descending constellation of death. Their teleport beacons flared once, twice, and the city's central command vanished beneath the glow of teleport flares. When the dust cleared, the first thing the Loyalists saw was not the Night Lord's armour, but the crucified corpses of their own officers, hung from the walls in the pattern of the Imperial Aquila. It took less than a day for Karaton's Reach to surrender. Sevatar accepted their compliance and then ordered their silence. No broadcasts, no survivors. The War Master would have his world cleansed and obedient. He carried out the campaign with ruthless precision. Fear was not indulgence, it was economy. 1,000 executions could accomplish what 10,000 soldiers could not. The more they feared, the fewer he had to kill. But something beneath the efficiency began to shift. The Night Lords, once united by a grim sense of justice, were now splitting into extremes. Some embraced the rebellion's promise of freedom with sadistic zeal. Others whispered of chaos, demons and faith, the gifts of the warp. To Sevatar, it was lunacy. He had seen what the warp did to men who stared too long into it. During a coordination meeting with the Word-Bearer's envoy, he made his stance clear. The Word-Bearer, a crimson giant with eyes that glowed faintly red, spoke of divine purpose and the truth of the gods. Sevatar listened just long enough to understand. Then he drew his pistol and shot the envoy through the mouth.
Divine enough for you?
He said to the corpse. His disdain for chaos was absolute. The Eighth fought not for gods, but for Curze's truth, that mankind obeyed only the lash. He would not bow to the demons pretending to be gods any more than he would bow to an emperor pretending to be a man. And yet, for all his conviction, Sevatar began to see cracks forming within himself. In the quiet hours aboard the Nightfall, he found his thoughts drifting to the ruins of Nostramo, to the look on Curze's face when the planet broke apart. The Legion's descent mirrored their primarchs. Every act of fear was now an echo of purpose long dead. They were becoming predators without prey, feeding only because they did not know how to stop. Still, Sevatar pressed on. Orders were orders, and the galaxy would burn whether he pitied it or not. The VIII Legion raged further into the Imperium's edges, cutting through resistance with mathematical cruelty. Worlds fell silent behind them. Propaganda called them monsters. Sevatar did not argue. He simply made sure that the next world screamed louder than the last. When reports came of the massacre at Istavan V, the betrayal that turned brother against brother in the open, Sevatar read the casualty list in silence. Whole legions annihilated, loyalist survivors hunted like vermin. The galaxy was bleeding exactly as Curze had foreseen. And for the first time, Sevatar felt something close to satisfaction. The Emperor's empire had been built on fear. Now, it was fear that was tearing it apart. As he stood in the dim light of Nightfall stratagem, watching the stars flare with the fires of distant wars, he realised that his legion had at last found its purpose. not in loyalty, not in vengeance, but in the perfection of its own nature. The Night Lords would never build an empire, they would never rule. They existed to prove a single truth, that terror, once born, could never be forgotten. And as the Void whispered with the voices of the dying Imperium, Sevatar smiled faintly, repeating the words he had given to history, the words that would outlive every Primarch, every creed, and every empire of man. Death to the false Emperor. The galaxy was burning, and in the embers, two predators found each other. The Thramas sector, a cluster of proud Imperial worlds that had long served the Dark Angels, became the stage for a war fought in silence and ash. For the Loyalists, it was a campaign of reclamation. For the Night Lords, a theatre of vengeance. And at the centre of it stood Jago Sevatarion, the Prince of Crows, a commander who had perfected the art of destruction without mercy or remorse. The Thramas Crusade began with the whisper of engines. The Nightfall prowled at the edge of sensor range, its hull as black as the void. The Night Lords didn't wage wars, they conducted autopsies on civilizations. Sevatar's fleets fell upon the sector like a plague of shadows, striking shipping lanes, killing communications, and severing every artery that fed the Lion's domain. Entire planets fell not by invasion but by paralysis. They simply stopped speaking. Each world learned a different lesson. On Tharax, the governor's family was found displayed in the courtyard of his palace, untouched by decay, eyes staring forever toward the rising sun. On Yarant, the Night Lords infiltrated the orbital fences and turned them inward, annihilating the population before any alarm could sound. On Varian, the Night Haunter himself descended, walking through the city's silent streets as citizens hid behind locked doors, listening to their own hearts in the dark. And always, Sevatar was the architect. He planned the patterns of death like a painter laying brush to canvas. The fear was not random, it was symphonic. He knew how long to let rumour breathe, how deeply to wound without killing, how to make the survivors into messengers. To Sevatar, fear was a resource. Every terrified breath was fuel for the Legion's engines. But the Thramas sector was not filled with prey. The Dark Angels, under their own grim lord, had come hunting. The Lion was nothing like his brothers. No idealist, no zealot, no beast. He was a strategist, cold and precise. He met Sevatar's terror with logic, and for the first time since Nostramo's destruction, the Night Lords found themselves matched. The war between them was not a clash of armies but of philosophies. Where Sevatar sought to unmake, the Lion sought to impose control. They mirrored each other, both calculating, both merciless, both sons of a father who had no love left for the galaxy. The first true engagement came over the moon world of Delgas II. The Night Lords had drawn the Dark Angels into pursuit, feigning retreat through the debris field of an orbital dockyard. When the Loyalists committed their strike cruisers to the chase, Sevatar's ambush unfolded with perfect precision. The debris came alive, hull fragments, derelict transports, even mined asteroids, all converted into hidden launch bays. The void erupted in a storm of torpedoes. The ambush crippled two of the Lion's cruisers and maimed a third, but it didn't end there. As the Dark Angels reeled, Sevatar teleported aboard one of their ships with the Atramenta. The corridors filled with smoke and blood. The first captain moved like a phantom, his chain glaive shrieking as it carved through the Loyalist elite. Within hours, the vessel's bridge was his. The last act of defiance from the ship's captain was a prayer to the Emperor before Sevatar sliced him with a backhand stroke that shattered helm and skull alike. Yet even as victory seemed certain, Sevatar sensed the tide turning. The Dark Angels did not fight as others did, they adapted. Every engagement that followed became harder. Every trap they set was mirrored by the Lion's own counter-ambushes. Worlds that had been easy prey now fought back with impossible discipline. For every Night Lord victory, there came a cost that cut deeper. The Thramas Crusade dragged on for years, each battle smaller, sharper, more vicious. Sevatar's fleet was stretched thin across dozens of systems, and still, the Lion hunted him relentlessly. In those long months, the first captain began to see what others would not admit. They were no longer the hunters. One night, in the blackened stratagem of the Nightfall, Sevatar stared at the hololithic map of the sector. Blue and red markers blinked like dying stars. The Dark Angel's advance was methodical, relentless. Each push cut another artery, isolating more of the Legion. Around him, his captains murmured options: retreat deeper into the void, abandon the sector, regroup at Curze's summons. In the campaigns that followed, Sevatar became more dangerous than ever. Where Curze fought with madness and revelation, Sevatar fought with precision. His tactics turned suicidal battles into stalemates, ambushes into bloodbaths. On Arcania Prime, he led a strike force through a collapsed orbital tunnel system, emerging in the heart of the Dark Angel's command citadel. The assault broke the Loyalist line for months, giving the 8th a moment of reprieve. But even victory left its scars. The Thramas Crusade was eating them alive, physically, mentally, spiritually. The Night Lords' morale frayed like a torn banner. They were fighting the Imperium's most disciplined warriors with dwindling munitions and no allies worth trusting. And through it all, Curze grew worse. The Night Hunter stalked his ship like a ghost, appearing without warning, vanishing for days, speaking in riddles. Sometimes, Sevatar would find him staring at the stars, whispering names that had not yet been written in the dead. Other times, he would emerge covered in blood that was not his own, preaching about destiny and punishment. Sevatar endured it, as he always had. He no longer sought to understand Curze. He simply executed his orders and made sure the Legion still resembled an army instead of a cult. Then came the message. An invitation, delivered through neutral channels, impossible to ignore. The Lion himself had called for parley. The Dark Angels promised safe conduct. Curze accepted without hesitation. Sevatar's instinct screamed trap, but he followed his Primarch nonetheless. As the fleets aligned for the meeting, Sevatar prepared the Atramenta in silence. His armour gleamed faintly under lumen strips, his gauntlets painted crimson, the Nostramo mark of a condemned man. He knew what it meant, all of them did. It was the badge of a warrior Curze had already decided would die. Still, Sevatar went. Duty and fatalism had long since become the same thing. When he boarded the shuttle, the Prince of Crows looked once more at the scarred reflection on his blade's surface. Around him, the ship's engines growled like caged beasts, waiting to unleash another storm. The Thramas Crusade had stripped away the illusions of empire, loyalty, and even victory. What remained was simple: survival, vengeance, and the shadow between them. In that darkness, Sevatar thrived. And as the shuttle descended toward the meeting world where the Lion and the Night Haunter would face each other at last, he thought only of the inevitable, the blood that would follow, and the silence that would come after. The meeting was meant to end the war. Sevatar knew it would end in blood instead. The dead moon of Tagulsa was cold and silent when their shuttle landed. Curze walked ahead, his gait unsteady, his laughter quiet and brittle. Sevatar followed, not out of faith, but duty. Someone had to make sure the Primarch's madness didn't finish what the Dark Angels had started. Across the plain, the Lion waited, immaculate, unreadable, his sword resting on one gauntleted hand. The two Primarchs faced each other without words at first. Prophets and killers, each convinced the other was a greater monster. Sevatar watched every moment, every twitch of armoured fingers. He wasn't afraid of the Lion, he was afraid of Curze. The argument began like a storm breaking. Accusations, condemnations. Curze laughed at talk of redemption. The Lion spoke of justice. They said the same words, but their meanings were different. One spoke to punish, the other to preserve. When the blades finally left their sheaths, Sevatar was already moving. The Atramenta ignited their weapons as the parley collapsed into chaos. He found himself dueling Alajos again, the same Dark Angel he scarred at deadliest II. Their weapons sang, sparks reflecting off the dust. The duel ended quickly. Sevatar struck low, then high, leaving the Loyalists dead on the stone. Across the field, the Lion and Curze were already locked in godlike combat. Light against shadow, law against terror. The sight of it froze even the Night Lords for a heartbeat. The duel was brief but apocalyptic, a storm of motion and fury that no mortal eye could follow. The ground split beneath their feet, the air screamed with the sound of energy fields colliding. When the dust cleared, the Lion stood unbowed, and Curze lay bleeding, his chest torn open by the strike of Corswain, who had intervened to defend his lord. The first blade's blow had pierced the Haunter's armour and cut deep into the flesh. For a moment, it seemed Curze would rise again, madness in his eyes, prophecy on his lips. But then the strength left him. He staggered, dropped to one knee, and fell. In that moment, Sevatar moved. He was at his Primarch's side in an instant, his glaive whirling in lethal arcs. He cut through the Dark Angels who closed in, dragging Curze back with brutal precision. Plasma bolts hissed past him, one tearing through his shoulder guard, another glancing his helm. He didn't falter.
"Form on me!"
he barked through the Vox. The Atramenta closed ranks, their shields locked as they advanced. Smoke charges detonated, covering their retreat in a shroud of grey ash. The Lion gave no pursuit. He watched in silence as the Night Lords vanished into the haze, carrying their fallen master back toward the waiting gunships. Perhaps even he understood that killing Curze would gain him nothing. Aboard the Nightfall, The Medicae worked in near darkness. Curze's blood ran like oil across the deck. His vitals flickered. His heart faltered and slowed. When they told Sevatar the truth, that his Primarch might not wake again, he didn't answer. He only stood beside the slab, helm in hand, expression unreadable. The war in the Thramas sector ended that day, though neither side could claim victory. The Lion had proved his might, Curze had proved his prophecy, and Sevatar, caught between them, had proved that loyalty could exist without illusion. When the Night Lord's fleet limped away into the void, Curze was comatose, the once living god reduced to fragile mortality. The burden of command fell to Sevatar. He took it as he took everything, without complaint, without hesitation. The Prince of Crows would now lead what remained of the VIII Legion. The war for the soul of the Night Lords was over, but the war for their survival was about to begin. The ambush at Shoal 9 shattered the Night Lords. The Primarch was comatose, the Legion was leaderless, and into that silence stepped Jago Sevatarion. He took command without ceremony. No one questioned him, no one dared. The first captain's voice carried through the wreckage, calm, sharp, unyielding. He issued orders as though the battle was already won, every syllable a scalpel cutting through the noise of panic. He regrouped the remnants of the fleet, formed them into a defensive shell around the wounded Nightfall, and bought precious hours of survival. When officers called for retreat, he ignored them. When mortals begged for orders, he simply said hold. In those bleak hours, Sevatar was everything Curze no longer could be. Clarity amid madness, structure amid ruin. But survival was never enough. When the void fell quiet, when the Lion ships drew back to reload and repair, Sevatar stood at the viewport and watched their formation. They moved like predators circling wounded prey. The thought of waiting for death disgusted him. He chose defiance. He chose the only thing left that made sense. Attack. He gathered the Atramenta, his Terminator elite, aboard the teleport decks. Their armour was scarred, their ammunition low, their ranks thin, but their faith in him was absolute. They would follow him into hell if he ordered, and perhaps this was close enough. Their target, one of the Lion's forward cruisers, a strike that would either cripple the Dark Angel's line or end the first captain himself. When the signal came, the Nightfall's teleport arrays screamed into life. In a blaze of ozone and warp static, Sevatar and his warriors materialised deep within the enemy vessel. The assault was instant, brutal, and silent. No battle cries, no speeches, only the hum of power weapons and the grind of armour through smoke and fire. The Atramenta carved through the decks like an autopsy knife, each movement rehearsed, each kill deliberate. Sevatar was everywhere at once, his chain glaive, Night's Whisper, a streak of midnight blue and arterial red, the corridors filled with the rhythmic thunder of his strikes, precise and unrelenting. But the Dark Angels had been waiting. This was no random ship, it was bait. Teleport inhibitors flared, cutting off their escape. Bulkheads slammed shut. Vox frequencies died one by one. The trap was perfect. Patient, surgical, inevitable. The Atramenta fought like caged gods, but the enemy came from every side. Plasma fire lit the corridors, reducing air to ash. Deathwing veterans advanced through the haze, their blades shining like the executioner's final word. Sevatar held the line until there was nothing left to hold. He fought with broken armour, with a broken weapon, with broken men. He struck until his servos failed, until his own blood turned his footing slick, until even his vision began to fade. At last, the storm overwhelmed him. The first captain of the Night Lords, executioner of Curze, master of terror, the Prince of Crows, fell beneath a tide of white and black. His glaive clattered to the deck, its teeth still spinning. When the lights dimmed, he was surrounded by the bodies of his brothers and the smoke of his own defeat. Captured. The Dark Angels took him alive, locking his shattered body within the cold stasis fields of the invincible reason. His armour was stripped, his weapons removed, but his eyes, when they finally opened, still held the same calm contempt that had carried him through a lifetime of slaughter. In his absence, the VII Legion began to dissolve. Captains turned pirate, sergeants became tyrants. The order he had built through discipline and fear crumbled into feral survival. The Night Lords had lost their reason, their centre, their executioner. And aboard a silent, black-walled cell on the Lion's flagship, Jago Sevatarion lay unmoving, his fate uncertain. The galaxy thought him defeated, but even broken, even bound, the shadow of the Prince of Crows still lingered, quiet, patient, and watching. Because darkness never truly dies. The invincible reason drifted through the void like a cathedral of judgment, cold, immaculate, and silent. Deep within its iron hull, a single cell pulsed with containment fields and psychic dampeners. Inside it, Jago Sevatarion, first captain of the Night Lords, lay in half-conscious stillness. He dreamed without dreaming. Voices whispered in his mind, ghosts of those he killed, fragments of memories he wished he'd forgotten. They came and went like tides, but among them, one voice remained. It was not a demon's hiss or the echo of Nostramo's screams. It was soft, human. Her name was Altani. She was a child, an astropath, blind and fragile, serving aboard the same ship that held him prisoner. Her mind, raw and unguarded, brushed against his across the psychic dampeners that caged them both. It should have been impossible, yet somehow, it wasn't. At first, Sevatar dismissed her as another hallucination. He heard voices before, his own fractured thoughts whispering back at him through the warp. But Altini's voice carried warmth, clarity, humanity. Through the bond, she saw what he was. The killer, the monster, the ghost of Nostramo, and didn't recoil. And through her eyes, he saw the ship's corridors, the light of distant stars, and a child trembling under the weight of fear. They spoke in fragments, memories traded like contraband. She'd asked about the stars he'd seen, and he told her of Nostramo's black sun, of rain that tasted like oil, of a world that had forgotten light. She told him about music, faint notes remembered from before her soul had been bound to service. For a time, in that silence between horrors, they were almost human. Then pain began. The master of choir, the ship's chief telepath, discovered that Altani's connection to the traitor could not be severed. He decided to teach her obedience. Her cries echoed through the psychic channels like knives. Sevatar felt every blow, every scream, every pulse of terror. Something inside him, something he had long believed extinguished, woke. The guards heard it first, the sudden drop in temperature, the crack of failing containment fields. Then came the sound of laughter, low, broken, and rising from the depths of the prison wing. The first captain of the Night Lords was awake. He tore through the cell door like a beast unchained, Vox cables whipping loose in sparks of blue. The first guards he met died without understanding why. The next tried to flee, and he broke them against the walls. The ship's alarms howled as Sevatar advanced towards the astropathic decks, guided by the psychic thread of Altani's pain. Each step was deliberate, each kill efficient. The corridors filled with the scent of ozone and blood. His language, spoken fluently once more. He found her in the choir chamber, bound to a metal throne, her small frame shaking under the master's psychic lash. Around them, the other astropaths had collapsed, bleeding from eyes and ears. Sevatar crossed the distance in silence. The master turned, shock twisting his face into something almost comical. The chain-glaive Knight's Whisper screamed once. When it stopped, the master of the choir was gone, a crimson outline against the deck. Altani looked up at him through bloodied eyelids. Her voice was faint, little more than breath inside his skull. "You came." He didn't answer. He couldn't. There were no words for what this was. Pity, rage, justice, all fused into something wordless and cold. He broke her bonds and set her free, but her body was already failing. The psychic torment had burned her out from within. She smiled once, faintly, gratefully, and was gone. For a long moment, Sevatar stood there, surrounded by silence. The alarms had stopped. The dead lay still. The ship itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, he turned away. He could have run. He could have fought his way to the hangars, taken a shuttle, and vanished into the void. But instead, he walked back the way he had come, through the corridors he'd painted red, past the corpses of those who had tried to contain him. When the Dark Angels found him, he was back in his cell, sitting cross-legged on the floor. His weapon lay beside him, his armour was cracked, his eyes closed. He didn't resist when they chained him again. There was no triumph in him, no regret, only the same calm certainty that had defined him all his life. The guards said he never spoke after that, but the ship's astropathic records told another story. Sometimes, late in the night cycle, they detected faint transmissions, fragments of thought flickering like distant lightning. Two voices entwined across the void. One belonged to Sevatar, the other to a girl who should have been dead. They said her laughter echoed through the ship's choir decks long after her body was gone. Whether it was a ghost, a psychic echo, or something deeper, no one could say. but those who knew the Prince of Crows understood what it meant. Jago Sevatarion, the coldest of killers, had committed his final act of mercy, and found, for a fleeting moment, something resembling peace. Even in chains, he had not been broken. He had simply stopped fighting. And in the dark heart of the Invincible Reason, two voices whispered still, one forged from shadow, the other from light. The last record of Jago Sevatarion ends aboard the Invincible Reason. After the death of Ashtapath Altani and his self-imposed surrender, the ship's logs fall silent. The Dark Angels never officially recorded his execution. There is no death date, no remains recovered, no proof of transfer, only silence. And silence, for the Prince of Crows, was never an ending, only a beginning. For years after the Siege of Terror, whispers followed the VIII Legion splinter fleets. Night Lord warbands claimed that their first captain still lived, that his voice came through the vox on dying ships, cold, measured, instructing them as he once did. Some said he escaped his cell during a warp storm that crippled the Invincible Reason centuries later. Others believed he was released by the Lion himself, out of a strange, wordless respect between killers who understood one another too well. The most persistent stories claim Sevatar returned to his legion in the long aftermath of the heresy, not as their commander, but as something far stranger. They said he walked among them unseen, his armour blackened and without heraldry, speaking to captains who had never met him, teaching discipline to men born long after his time, a ghost of region in a legion of madness. Another theory, darker still, claimed that Curze himself freed him before his death, that Sevatar awoke from stasis to find his Primarch alive one last time, that the two spoke, perhaps for the final time, before Curze walked willingly to his assassin's blade. If so, Sevatar never spoke of it. Others whispered that he never truly woke at all, that he died in his cell, body failing, mind already adrift in the same psychic half-realm where Altani's soul lingered. That what the Night Lords hear across the centuries is not a voice at all, but a memory, a fragment of his will echoing through the immaterium. And then, there are the rarest tales, the ones that even the Eighth dare not speak aloud. They say he was offered godhood, as so many traitors were, that the dark gods reached out to him, promising eternity in exchange for servitude. He refused, and because of that, they erased his name from their sight. No demon, no saint, no resurrection, only silence. The one man in 10,000 years who denied both gods and masters alike. What is known is this: the Night Lords were never the same. Without their first captain, they became fractured echoes of what they had once been. Warbands splintered across the Eye of Terror, each claiming to honour his memory by forgetting his discipline, his restraint, his understanding of fear as a structure. For all their brutality, none ever mastered terror as he did. They could make men scream, but only Sevatar could make them obey. Even now, when the Imperium speaks of the Night Lords, his name lingers like a half-remembered curse. Among his brothers, it became litany, whispered before battle, etched into armour, scratched into the walls of derelict ships. Prince of Crows, First Captain, Executioner. To them, he is not dead. He is an idea, a reminder that fear must serve purpose, that cruelty without reason is weakness, that even monsters require order. And in that, perhaps, lies his truest immortality. In the end, Jago Sevatarion was everything the Imperium pretended not to need. He was discipline without faith, violence without delusion. He was the blade that cut away weakness, in his enemies, in his brothers, in himself. Yet he never prayed to gods. He never sought glory. He only ever served the one constant truth he believed in, that the galaxy runs on consequence. The Emperor forgot that. Curze never learned it, but Sevatar understood it perfectly. And that is why his name endures. Not as a hero, not as a martyr, but as something far more honest. A man who saw the universe for what it was, and met its gaze unflinching. Somewhere, perhaps, a derelict ship still drifts in the void, its vox system whispering old voices through the static. Among them, a calm, measured tone cuts through the interference.
Hold your line. You know your duty.
No one ever answers, but in that silence, the message carries on. A ghost of command, from a warrior who never truly needed a throne. Even in death, he serves. Even in silence, he endures. Because fear remembers, and so too does the Prince of Crows. You have received the transmission of Dominissimo Voxlor. The galaxy still trembles at the memory of the first captain, a man who gave fear structure and mercy meaning. The shadows of Nostramo linger, and the crows still circle over broken worlds. Mark your allegiance, strike the seal of subscription, and join those who endure the long night between stars. Until the next broadcast, remember, in darkness, truth takes its truest form.